Just over 2 years ago, the Elder Scrolls Online launched its Greymoor chapter, one of, if not the most popular ESO chapters ever released. Subtitled The Dark Heart of Skyrim, the Greymoor chapter not only focused its central storyline around vampire themes, but also rebalanced and repurposed the vampire skill line itself in an attempt to make playing a vampire in ESO a more fulfilling experience. And many players, myself included, were excited for the idea of vampire builds in ESO finally getting the attention they deserved. But was that promise of better vampire builds fully realized, or is there still something missing? To answer that question, let's take a deep dive into the vampire skill line and see if being a vampire is still worth it in the Elder Scrolls Online. Alright, so for this particular video, this is going to be sort of a deep dive into the vampire skill line. I'll go over each skill in detail as well as the passives. Kind of tell you if I think they're still good, or if not, maybe a couple things that could be changed. I do want to briefly talk about werewolves, werewolf versus vampire. The comparison I think is difficult because when you look at both skill lines, they do different things. Werewolf, for example, is a lot more of a self-contained skill line. I think that should be obvious because once you're transformed, once you're in that werewolf form, you can't use any other skills, right? You're stuck with your werewolf skills. And so because of that reason, those skills need to have a very specific purpose. You need a heal, you need, a stun, a gap closer, you need damage skills, both single target and AoE. So I think werewolf really does fit that design. It's more of a simple design, right? It makes more sense. When you look at vampire, you can't compare it directly to werewolf in that way because the vampire skill line is designed differently. Once you are a vampire, you're not stuck in any type of vampire form. Even though there is now a transformation ultimate skill for the vampire, you can still use all your other skills. You can use class skills, you can use weapon skills, guild skills. So even though I'm going to talk a little bit about werewolf in this video, I'm going to try to avoid direct comparison, at least all the time, because I think vampire has a very different purpose. And I just want to make sure we have that point made up front. Vampire is not self-contained, right? You still have access to your class skills and other skills. So if anything, I think the vampire skill line should be more of an accent or more of an add-on to what you're trying to do with your class skills. And maybe vampire should be more about filling in the gap. Maybe if your class doesn't have a melee spammable, you can get that from the vampire skill line. It already does that actually, which we'll look at in a second. Maybe it will add a few, unique utility aspects that you don't have in your class skill line that can round out your build, make it more powerful in certain ways, make it more fun, but definitely not like an all-in-one skill line as the werewolf is. So let's jump over to the vampire skills and check out these as well as the morphs and see if these are actually good or not. So let's start with the base skills and eviscerate. We kind of talked about this. This is your melee spammable skill. If you look at the tooltip, for example, this is exactly the same damage, about 7,800 magic damage as your other class DPS skills. In fact, it's 1 damage higher. I'm not sure why that is. But it's basically, a copy of a melee DPS skill, which I think is fine. It'll serve that purpose if you don't have a good, melee range spammable, let's say maybe on the Warden class, where Wardens, you have Cliff Racer and you have Deep Fissure. Those are more ranged abilities. If you want to play a pure melee build, you could go Vampire, throw in Eviscerate. That's a good option for your class. Same thing maybe with Sorcerer or Necromancer has Scythe. Scythe has been buffed now, but previously, Scythe wasn't as good. You could use Eviscerate. We can look at the effects here. The base morph causes you to deal up to 33% more damage based on your missing health. And then if you look at the other ones, let's start with Arterial Burst. The new effect is this is always going to be a critical strike if you cast it while under 50% health. So it's taking that missing health bonus effect and ramping it up even more. I think overall this is kind of a risky ability. And that's one of the things that ZeniMax decided with these new, the overhaul of the vampire skill line was it was really going to be focused on this risk-reward mentality of the lower health you are, the more powerful you're going to become. You can see that with skills like this, where if you're under half health, it's always a critical strike. Now, is that a good idea in theory? I think yes, it is. But when you look at more practical applications for solo content, for even group content, how often are you going to be under 50% health or less, right? In most cases, the more difficult, the more advanced we get in ESO, the harder enemies are going to hit us, the more damage they're going to do to our health. And so this becomes very risky to maintain that damage bonus. Generally, you don't want to drop below, a certain threshold of health. And even if you do, let's say in group content, your healer is going to heal you back probably automatically anyways with AoE heals and heal over time effects. So here's one of the first problems that I see is that the theme is very clear, right? You're missing health to make you more powerful, but that doesn't really line up with the way that ESO works in a lot of cases. And when we look at the other morph, I think it gets even worse. Blood for blood, this costs health to cast the skill, which I think is a good mechanic. I do actually like this. It increases the execute scaling, so you're going to do even more damage the lower health you are. But then after casting the ability, you can no longer be healed by your allies for 3 seconds. So again, in something like, let's say, veteran group content, this becomes a huge problem for a vampire build where your healer cannot heal you. So interesting, idea behind this skill, but I don't think it really works out very well in actual content in the game. Let's move on to the next skill, Blood Frenzy. This basically gives you a ramping weapon and spell damage buff, but also costs health to cast. So let's look at the morphs here. Sated Fury is a little bit more of the safe morph. The health cost here increases by 300 per stack, up to 5 times. And again, you cannot be healed by anyone other than yourself. So same problem that we had with Blood for Blood. The good thing is that when you toggle this off, it does give you a heal back. But that heal has been scaled back. It's been nerfed, I think, multiple times at this point where it won't be as strong. So again, I'm not sure what to do with this. It seems like more of a solo skill since I can't be healed by other players. It is a little bit better in a solo build because I can manage this. If I have good healing over time from my other skills in my class skill line, I can manage this, so it is okay. But again, it completely reduces the effectiveness of vampires in group content, and especially veteran and hard mode group content where you really need heals in order to survive. Same thing here with Simmering Frenzy. You cannot be healed by anyone other than yourself. This is actually even riskier because it increases the health cost, but it gives you more weapon and spell damage. Look at the next skill, Vampiric Drain. This goes back to the earlier version of vampires where we had this kind of skill. I think it's decent. I mean, it's a very niche kind of skill. The more popular morph is definitely Exhilarating Drain. So this is a channeled sort of siphon ability where you drain your enemy's vitality, you deal some magic damage, you get some healing back based on a percentage of your missing health. So this is typically run on like tank builds or high health builds because the more health you have, the more effective the healing is going to be. And you also generate 2 ultimate every 1 second for 3 seconds. So this is actually kind of nice for some, like I said, niche builds. If you're focusing on ultimate generation and tanking, can be pretty good. The problem is the channel, right? It's a channeled ability, which means if you're a tank especially, you can't be blocking at the same time. You have to drop your block in order to use this. But at the same time, it's a unique source of ultimate. So kind of the risk reward here, I think, is okay. This is one of the better, more unique abilities in the vampire skill line. When we look at the other morph here, Drain Vigor, it's basically the same concept, but instead of getting ultimate back, you now get stamina, which I don't see this as being nearly as useful. If you're going to need stamina, probably the better thing to do would just be to do a heavy attack with like a melee weapon, right? So I think a rework to this morph could be really nice. Maybe they reduce the channel time of this morph. Maybe they make a non-channeled morph. Something like that that's more unique other than just restoring stamina, because I don't think that's very useful for any build. Okay, Mesmerize is a stun. Now this is probably my least favorite skill in the vampire skill line. Couple of reasons. Number one, the stun only works if the target is facing your direction. So it's possible, with AoE pulls and things like that, that the stun might not even go off. On the good side, the stun cannot be blocked, but I feel like this is just sort of a useless skill. Remember what we said earlier, vampires are different from werewolves. You don't need to have access to every type of skill in the vampire skill line because most classes have class-based stuns that are going to be better than this, and they don't have the requirement that the target is facing you. You can look at the morphs here. Hypnosis is now AoE, so instead of like the conal stun, this affects all enemies. But again, they do have to be facing your direction. And then the Stupefy Morph is still a conal stun, so it's going to stun enemies in front of you. Again, only if they're facing your direction, but they're going to get a snare after the stun effect ends. So again, not a huge fan of this skill. I think this could be substituted with something more unique, something more utility, like maybe a gap closer, maybe a blink or a vanish or some type of mobility skill. This just seems so generic to me. And like I said, most classes are going to have a better option anyway. So yeah, I would not use this skill pretty much all the time. Let's talk about Misform. So Misform has been nerfed recently. And specifically, it only works now for damage reduction in PvP content, so basically against players. So we can see here, dissolve into Dark Mist, reducing your damage taken from players by 75%. Elusive Mist grants you major expedition, so that's the speed morph. And Blood Mist gives you magic damage and an AoE and also heals you back. So this was changed, I think, a few patches ago. This is a very lazy change, in my opinion. Basically, from what I understand, there was a particular boss in a certain trial. So difficult, right, that one of the best ways to manage that for tanks was to use the previous version of Misform, which was 75% damage reduction. And before that, vampire tanks, were not popular, but at least it was an option, right? You could throw on your Misform and you could greatly reduce your incoming damage. But at the same time, there was a downside. It's a channel, so you can't do anything else. Can't be blocking at the same time. You can't be casting other abilities. So in my opinion, it was a legitimate play style that was very niche, right? It didn't get used by a lot of tanks. I only used it in one build ever. It was a very fun build, the unkillable Necro build. But yeah, you can't do it anymore because they decided to take it away for PvE content. So I would love to see some of the damage reduction come back for vampire tanks. It doesn't have to be 75%. That could be way too high. That's totally fine. Maybe bring it back to 30% or something like that. Again, it was just nice to have that other unique form of damage reduction that could be combined with other things like minor protection and major protection to make a very focused, damage reduction build. I think you need to be able to niche down into certain specific playstyles like that makes the game more interesting. So many ways they could fix that. They could keep Elusive Mist as like the PvP morph where you have a greater damage reduction and the extra movement. Keep that for PvP only. That's totally fine. Maybe Blood Mist is the PvE morph where you get the healing back, but the damage reduction is greatly reduced. Like I said, I think 30%, something in that range would be really good still for PvE content and not overpowered. Of course, we have the ultimate here, Blood Scion, which is the transformation ultimate. While transformed, your max health, max magicka, and max stamina are increased by 10,000. And you heal for about 15%, 16% of the damage that you deal. And you can see enemies through walls. That's a really interesting, effect here. But how good is this ultimate really? I mean, one of the problems is it has a pretty large cost. It is a transformation. It does give you lots of bonus stats and healing. But the fact that it costs so much and you can't regain ultimate while you're in the transformation means it's pretty hard to use this in actual content. If we look at the morphs here, I prefer Swarming Scion. This gives you an extra AoE damage effect. So the bat swarm around you, those deal damage. It's also going to heal you back. But then Perfect Scion has, I think, less of an identity and less usefulness. It makes you ascend to Vampire Stage 5, which basically grants you all the benefits of being Vampire Stage 4 with none of the drawbacks. We'll talk about stages in a little bit. But yeah, the ultimate just feels really lackluster for especially how much it costs. And the fact that it's not a 100% transformation, right? Which I think is fine. Like I said, Werewolf is different. Werewolf, you're supposed to be in the form as long as possible. Vampire can be different. It can be like you're in the form for only 15, 20 seconds, something like that. But it needs to be more unique. It needs to be more impactful in that short duration of time. This feels more like a werewolf-style transformation. But since it's short, it's really not as useful. So honestly, not too sure what to do about this one. I think it does need some reworking for the ultimate. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, how that could be fixed. All right, so we can check out the passives here. Feed is the basic way that you go from stage 1 all the way up to stage 4. There are some benefits and some downsides to that. So your health recovery goes down, flame damage taken goes up, regular ability cost goes up, vampire ability cost goes down. Again, that changes based on what stage you are. Darkstalker is going to remove the penalty of sneak and also decrease the time it takes to enter sneak. So it's a nice sort of like roleplay passive, I would say. Same thing kind of with Strike from the Shadows. This gives you bonus weapon and spell damage whenever you leave sneak, invisibility, or mistform. Yeah, you can, get some usefulness out of this, especially in PvP, I would say. But it is definitely more of a niche passive. Undeath is probably the most popular, the most well-known passive, where it reduces the damage taken up to 30% based on your missing health. But you do need to be at stage 3 vampire or higher to get this bonus. So there's different costs that have to do with that. Blood Ritual, this is how you, transform other players. And Unnatural Movement is a pretty cool one. This reduces the cost of your sprint. And also, if you continuously sprint for 3 seconds, you automatically become invisible. But you do need to be Vampire Stage 4. So we talked about the abilities, we talked about the passives and ultimate. Just a couple of conclusions here that I have noticed as I've been checking out the skill line. Number one, we can talk about the feed mechanic, right? And the different benefits and downsides to being a vampire. Number one, the health recovery is pretty annoying. Like it's a weird mechanic that is just not fun. I will say that. It's not fun to be Vampire Stage 4 and have 0 health recovery. Main thing is, if you're wandering around the world, especially if you're mounted, if you go over a little hill or a rock or something and you take some health damage, you are literally stuck at that health, and you have to, if you're mounted, get off. You have to use a heal. Vampires don't even have a heal in their skill line. Heal yourself back up somehow, get back on your mount, and continue on. So it's pretty annoying, and I think it's just too punishing. Like, why not just make this, 50% at stage 4, or 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, something like that, where, okay, I get it, vampires, they're less healthy for whatever reason, but not just cut it off at 0 health recovery. That's something that I think needs to be addressed just for the mechanics of the game and making it more playable. That's kind of similar to what we talked about with the healing, where you can't be healed by other players with a lot of these skills, right? With Blood for Blood, with Blood Frenzy. Not being able to receive a heal when using a skill is a really big downside, and it's sort of gating off the vampire builds from harder content, right? Especially if you want to bring your vampire into a group, into veteran dungeons, trials, hard mode content. I don't see how you're going to do that if you can't get healed from a healer. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. So again, it's an all or nothing mechanic that's too punishing and not really fun. I get the idea and the theme behind it, but let's just make it, instead of you can't be healed, how about you can only be healed for 50%? Something like heals from other players are 50% less effective for 3 seconds. Something like that, right? Where again, it's not all or nothing. It makes a difference because we're a vampire, whatever, but it's just more manageable. I think that would be a lot better. Same thing when we talk about, skill cost increases. This is, again, a punishing mechanic that I just don't think makes a lot of sense. I don't know. If I'm way off, you guys can let me know in the comments here. But why do my regular abilities cost more as a stage 4 vampire? What the increased ability cost does is it pushes you away from using other skills, and it sort of forces you or pushes you towards using vampire skills more often. The problem is, like we said when we looked at these skills, is that they're just not that effective. So your best skills, even as a vampire, are still going to be those other ones from other skill lines, like your class skills, your guild skills, your weapon skills. So why would I ever, become a vampire stage 4 if it only makes it more difficult for me to use my best skills? It just doesn't make sense. If it was flipped where, vampire skills were much, much stronger, then I could see it actually making more sense. But I don't know. It's just another weird sort of passive punishment that doesn't make sense to me. So I think, even with the reworked vampire skill line, there's still many things here that can be addressed. We went over some of them in this video. Of course, if you have ideas, let me know what you think down in the comments section. I actually did a poll recently on my channel where I asked a similar question If you thought that the vampire skill line needed some reworking, it's got a few thousand responses, and the majority, like overwhelming majority of people who responded said yes, vampire definitely needs some love to make this skill line what it really needs to be. So if you have any ideas for that, let us know what you think down in the comments section below. And as always, thanks for watching. Hey everybody, if you're struggling at all with the Elder Scrolls Online, I definitely know the feeling. I struggled with this game for months. The biggest problem I had was, even though the game says you can play any way you want, it never really teaches you how. Like I said, it took me many months of teaching myself how the game works before I could actually start to make builds that were truly effective and fun to play. Well, today I'm excited to let you know that I finally put down my system for creating builds into a simple step-by-step guide that you can now learn and use to create your own fun and powerful builds yourself. We're calling this the ESO Zero to Hero Academy, and it's being hosted through Podia, which is an amazing online learning platform. So far, our ultimate build guide has over 25 lessons and over 2 hours of content designed to take you from a beginner to a master theory crafter. Not in years like it took me, but in just a few hours. So if you want to check out the guide and preview all of the included lessons, just click on the Start Now button below to learn more.